Boker Tov. The names have been changed, but the story hasn't. This is an email I got February 2011. Not to me, to Rivka. My name is Brian Shields. I'm a first-year graduate student at Temple University. Congratulations on being offered an interview. We're going to have a pre-interview social event on Sunday night. We hope to relax a little bit before you interview on Monday. We'll be going to a bar called Black Sheep. It's located here and there. If you requested to stay with a current graduate student, you'll be hearing from your host soon. We'll help you coordinate how to get to the restaurant. Addressed to me. What am I supposed to do? Better yet, what do you suggest? She was engaged at that time, Baruch Hashem, married, baby's going on 2 years old, I think. So he, nice, yes? So he asked his Rebbe what to do. Rav X became livid about the issue. Seemed to be very motivated in his opinion. There's something in the Gemara, she writes me, to the tune of Lo Tismach B'Goyim, not exact. He was imposed to the environment, the light, the music, and maybe the possibility of guys coming on to me, even as an engaged woman. When he told me, when the chassan, my chassan, told him that the graduate student is going to report back to the admissions committee, and therefore my presence there is important, he said, B'di'evet, I could go in and go out, say hi and bye, but nothing more. We had an ongoing email conversation. This is what she wrote to Brian. I apologize for not writing back sooner. I had limited access to email over the past few days. Absolutely not true. She had full access to email, but she didn't know what to write. Thank you very much for the invitation, although I would love to join you and meet everyone. Unfortunately, I have a prior commitment that I can't miss. Hope you have a blast. She got in. Not necessarily she would have gotten in. Some people wouldn't have gotten in because they didn't participate in the social event. How does one keep kosher with a non-Jewish roommate? Can you share a stove, other kitchen utensils? Can a student eat at the apartment of his friends, of her friends, if she's not sure whether they keep the same level of kashrus observance? How can a student access a dormitory when all the rooms are accessed through electronic locks and key cards? Can one rely on a non-Jewish student to open up one's rooms with a magnetic card? Can a student attend classes on Yantov if they don't do any malacha? On Sukkot, may men and women sleep in the same large sukkah? What can a student do if the roommate is regularly inviting students of the opposite gender to the room? What if one realizes that more than visiting? For everything that I'm reading to you now, there's another 22 that I have here. Can a student wear a commencement robe with a cross on it? What we're going to discuss today, as the title says, is that for many of you, the contacts with the outside world have been limited. You go to the store, you go shopping, you go to some type of event that occurs, but then you come back to your own home, to your own neighborhood, to your own school, to your own michala. And even for those who are going to Jewish colleges, it's still a different type of encounter that's going to come about. And therefore one has to live with this outside world. That's what's there. That's why we called it engaging the outside world. But it's not necessarily frightening. It's a challenge. It's also an opportunity, as we will see. And sometimes it provides confrontations that nobody likes to have, but they're there. So let us see. Yes. I'm going to go for the next 2 minutes or so, a brief summary picture of some of the things we'll be talking about at greater length, at lesser length. We're going to then give some makaros about how to think about dealing with these issues. And then we're going to go back to these things and see what they say, and we'll try to figure out what we can say and what we're able to talk about. I think I skipped one already. Did I? No. Some things are pretty objective halachically. What do you do when there's classes on Yontiv? Erev Shabbos, when Shabbos is at 4 o'clock and classes finish at 5 o'clock. What do you do about Chol HaMoed? What do you do about Nagia? This isn't general Nagia conversations. This is about somebody wants to shake your hand, etc., etc. Amira la'akum. There's halachos that tell us how we can have a non-Jew do things for us and how it's forbidden to have a non-Jew do for us. What is one supposed to do when one's in a school? And as we heard some of the questions, can the non-Jewish person use my key card to open the room? What are the rules for it? What happens if I'm in a school and there has to be a seminar involved and we're asked to present different types of opinions in a very open, friendly, non-coercive way, and they say, you're an Orthodox person, why don't you present something on Torah? And there's non-Jews who are sitting in the class. The Pasuk says, Morasha Kilas Yaakov, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. It's an inheritance, and Chazal say, Ma'orasa, it's betrothed, the Torah is betrothed to us. There's a personal relationship between the Jew and his Torah, and one doesn't teach Torah to non-Jews. What happens when I'm not happy with what's going on? Can I go complain? Can I speak Lashon Hara about the people who are there? All these are questions that happen all the time. And some of the questions are not just practical halacha, as we said before. Some of the questions are philosophical. Some of them are theological in terms of our beliefs. And these, for some of the people here, will present greater challenges than whether what to do on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay? The discussion will be about creation, evolution. The discussion will be about, not Tanakh, but the Bible. Who wrote the Bible? Who wrote the various parts of the Bible? The following is a quote, and I apologize, I don't remember where I took it from, but I saw it, and it said it so well that I couldn't not present it to you. Somebody said, in terms of gender issues, who can marry whom, and who can be like the way they want, and whether it should be public or it should be private, and the New York Times is having a whole series of editorials. I wasn't zocher to read it today about how we have to treat transgender people better, etc., etc. Okay, your attitude. Somebody wrote in one of the newspapers, might have been the New York Times, but I don't remember. Your attitude is discordant with cultural norms. Couldn't say it better. There are cultural norms. You don't fit in. Bezrat Hashem. In many of the situations that you're going to be in, you won't fit in. How do you relate to it? How do you feel about it? Because the issues aren't here only what other people think. The issues that we're dealing with here, as we'll see, is how you think. Kiruv. What am I supposed to do? People want to ask me questions. How do I treat with them? Israel. Okay? Treatment of Arabs. Does Israel treat Arabs nicely? The wars, this past summer's war in Gaza, as you all know, made the headlines and had all sorts of condemnations. Do you all know what BDS is? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Yefeh mod. Okay? Boycott, don't buy Israeli products. If you have stocks that belong to Israel, get rid of them, divest of them, and put punishment, sanctions upon Israel. Whether you like it or not, everybody, each and every one of you, wherever you're going to be, whether you're more of a Tzioni or less of a Tzioni, you're going to be an ambassador for Medina Israel. No choice about it. People are going to see you. They're going to challenge you about things. And sometimes, of course, people might give you support. But that's the nice part. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. What do you do about such things? You're in a class, and the teacher in the middle of the class starts berating Israeli treatment of what they call Palestinians. And saying if anybody buys a product from Israel, what are you supposed to do about such things? How are you supposed to live? What are you supposed to do? And then there's other parts as well. Shabbos Hayom is a quotation from Maseches Yuma in the beginning of Maseches Yuma. All sorts of things that people who are employed by others might sometimes face, Chazal already talked about it. Chazal said that the Jewish worker came to his non-Jewish employer and said, Shabbos Hayom, Pesach Hayom, Yom Kippur Hayom, Sukkot Hayom, Shavuos Hayom. You have a test that's scheduled. And even if the people try to be nice, and many times people are nice and they're understanding, they all know what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is. That at least is a well-known types of things. Not too many people know what Sukkot is, and nobody knows what Shavuos is, because cheesecake isn't so popular, so nobody knows what it is. So therefore, how do you defend yourself? What do you do when you're in an environment with other religious Jews, and Baruch Hashem, you have your standards, and people don't have your standards? They might have standards different than yours. I didn't say better, I didn't say worse. How do you defend yourself? Do you say, I'm less religious than them? I'm more religious than them? You say this to a person who's not religious whatsoever. You say it to a non-Jew. Many school situations want to have what in Ivrit we would call gibush chevrati. They want to motivate people to form a social unit. Those of you who are going to Queens and one of the, what are the honors programs in Queens called? Macaulay. Macaulay has a very important fact. All the students to get together, I don't know if in the same bar with Brian or not, but to get together and form a close, cohesive social group. Not just people who are in the same class to share notes sometimes, but the group itself should be a cohesive group. What do you do about it? And what do you do when you're in places, and sometimes it's the teachers, that there's nivel peh, inappropriate discussions about male-female types of issues. What do you do when you're there? And a frequent conversation, particularly from girls who are in Queens, is that they find that often Muslim girls who wear veils and are more tsanua, it appears, like to be friendly with the Orthodox Jewish girls. And there's a reason, because evidently they're sensitive to some of the very same things that we're sensitive, and they find that it's a protective environment for these types of things. And anti-Semitism. And perhaps the major part here is what happens when I'm faced with information that causes me to be unsure about myself. Personal challenges to belief, commitment, and observance. If all of a sudden something shakes me up, and I used to think that it was pretty clear to me, and all of a sudden it's not clear to me. It was clear to me how I'm supposed to behave, and all of a sudden it's not. And maybe I understand why. Maybe it's more of a philosophical, intellectual type of challenge that I have. Or maybe it's personal because I want to fit in with everybody else. Nobody else does it that way. How can I be myself? What do I do with the challenges? Of course, sadly enough, for some people such situations aren't challenging. They're overwhelming and they're defeating. But Be'ezrat Hashem, for those who it's a challenge, and the challenge isn't a sign of weakness. Defeat is a sign of weakness. The fact that a person can be challenged and think about it and try to deal with it is a sign of inner strength and a sign of a person's self-respect for that which he believes in and wanting to come to terms and to be well with all that a person does. So there's nothing wrong with it. So now let's see, after we've seen these things, what are some of the makoros for us? You all understand that when we see the things that were, the questions that we had, and I have literally dozens and dozens more, some more sensitive and some less sensitive, but all important because people choose to ask them, and that makes them significant. How am I supposed, is there a Torah framework for how I'm supposed to look at these things? And that's for the next 10 minutes or so. You have the pages in front of you. You want to mark something down. You have the pages in front of you. But from a Torah perspective, can we have some makorot that gives us some information of a general approach to the questions that are here? Obviously, certain questions like Amira La'akum, and what do you do on, can you sit in a class on Yom Tov, or what do you do on Chol HaMoed when there's classes? Those are the simpler types of things which I probably won't even deal with today. There's a Mishnah in Avos that we all know, where Eliezer Omer, have a shakud lomod Torah, be dedicated in your learning of Torah, v'dam asher tashiv apikoros, and know what you're supposed to answer an apikoros. An apikoros is worse than the Rasha of Pesach. He's more difficult than the Rasha of Pesach that we say Hakeh. What do you say to the apikoros? You're supposed to know to give him an answer. Apikoros is someone who doesn't believe. He's a denier. There are really very formal definitions between kofer and apikoros, and there's special words for them, but that's really not our subject. This is an inclusive term that gives us. So therefore, what does it say? Da masha toshiv apikoros. Know what you're supposed to say. However, there is a little bit of an asterisk over da masha toshiv apikoros, because in Masechet Sanhedrin, the Gemara brings this Mishnah that we know, and I underline what Rabbi Yochanan says: Lo shanu el apikoros nochri. You have to know how to answer the non-Jewish apikoros. The non-Jew who says the Torah isn't given for you, or there wasn't a Torah, or the Torah has been replaced because it's an old one, and now there is a new one, etc., the things that we face in the world today. If you start answering him, he's going to be defensive, and he's going to answer you more, and he'll become more hefker, more free-believing. Says Rashi, we're not interested that we should confront him when there's no chance that he's going to be convinced of what you want to say. Because all you're going to do is make himself dig deeper and deeper into his non-belief. So you don't want to be that the confrontation is one of egos. It's not a confrontation that is of one-upmanship. You said that, but I can show you that I'm smarter than you, but I didn't realize maybe you're smarter than me. It's not a type of contest. It's an idea that one wishes to accomplish something, and when that accomplishment has a zero chance of success, then in fact, then you give up. Except the Medrash adds another asterisk to the asterisk. V'afal pikein, it said, Apikoros Yisrael lo kol shekain tipakar tfei. He'll become more hefker. V'afal pikein, tzrichim anachnu lahashiv l'ksilim. Not everyone who doesn't believe is an apikoros. Very few people have come to beliefs only based on intellectual beliefs that they don't believe in Torah, or they say that there is no God, etc. Leis din v'leis dayan. There's no judgment, there's no judge. Very few people come to such a conclusion based on intellectual considerations. Usually there's far more involved in such situations, and those people, as the Medrash says, afal pikein tzrichim anachnu lahashiv liksilim. There are people who are foolish, who just don't know. Shortly we're going to see a little bit of a definition of who these ksilim are and how to stay away from them. We'll see right away. But nonetheless, says a Mishnah, there's a pasuk, Anei ksil ki'ivalto, pen yechacham beinav. Answer the fool according to his foolishness. Give him an answer. Damashetoshiv, know what to answer him. Pen yechacham beinav. Otherwise, he might think that he himself is a smart guy. He says something which is of derision to Torah, of Torah beliefs, of mitzvos, and therefore one letter goes unanswered, then he might think he's a chacham beinav. Your lack of answering is a proof that I'm right. And therefore we have this double-edged sword. On the one hand, I'm afraid pakar tefei. If I come into discussion that I might not win, the person is going to be more entrenched in their beliefs. On the other hand, if I don't respond whatsoever, he might think, chacham beinav, I won. It's my win. A difficult place to be. Sometimes when we have these ksilim, and that comes in terms of kiruv, of people who don't know, the tam and the she'ino yodea lishol, sometimes young men who are in those situations are approached by young women for explanations, and sometimes it's vice versa. What does one do when one is requested to be makarev others? This is a sefer called Midot HaRa'iyah. Do you know who HaRa'iyah is? Rav Kook. Okay? Rav Kook had many writings. And one of them, is a small little sefer, it's in part of one of his larger books, called Midot HaRa'iyah, a sefer on Midos. He writes this is called Midat HaTzniut. It's about 3 paragraphs long, half a page. Midat HaTzniut zocha lidchot mipaneha. The midah of tzniut has the merit that it takes precedence. Devarim shayu tovim mitzad atzmam. It takes precedence over other things which are inherently good. Aval mikevan yetzer ha'adam v'kocho hechalash. But because a person has a yetzer, and because a person's strengths are weak, yigmaru, they will cause him lifrotz b'midat hatzniut, to break through. That is, not to observe the midat tzniut. Shehi kiyumo shel ha'olam haruchani v'chomer. Because that's the way not only the spiritual world, but the material world exists. And therefore he continues, I didn't bring the whole thing, you can look it up, it's fine, that those types of conversations, even in terms of kiruv, those have to stay separate between men and women. There's a halacha. There's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch begins in Siman Aleph with the following din. V'lo yisbayesh b'pnei b'nei adam hamaligim alav ba'avodas Hashem Yisbarach. If people mock you, if people make fun of you, if people want to say, why are you doing these foolish things? Why are you putting these straps on your hand? Why do you go like this? And why are you talking to yourselves? Lo yitbayesh. Of course, this halacha of lo yitbayesh, this isn't the first time you're seeing it. You're already familiar from the Shmoneh Esrei. What do you say in Shmoneh Esrei? What do we say in Shemon Esrei? Below Nebosh. It's a tefillah. If the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah had to take this halacha, which was obviously written thousands of years later in the Shulchan Aruch, but take this halacha and make it part of a tefillah, so even though halacha says, don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed in front of those who mock you, if it has to be a tefillah, what is the implication? It's way easier to be said than done. It's much easier to say it, but it's much harder to avoid the embarrassment if I'm unsure of myself. The Mishnah Berurah, which we're going to see here below, the Mishnah Berurah, and there's a Bir Halacha, talk about when there is not a personal confrontation that exists, but there's a confrontation that exists in the community as well between various groups, and maybe then one has to be what one is to do. But when it's personal, says the Mishnah Berurah here, the al kol panim lo yitkoteti mayim. Don't quarrel with people. Quarreling is not the same thing as masha toshiv. Masha Tashiv means a responsible conversation and dialogue. Someone says, someone responds. Yid kotate means you lose your cool. Yid kotate means you lose your temper. Lo yid kotate imahem, and don't tell them off. Mipnei shemidat ha'azut muguna ma'od. Because when a person tells other people off and wants to put them in their place, they're expressing an example of azut. Azut is brazenness. Azut metzach, strong-mindedness, chutzpah, I'm better than you. But I'm telling somebody off who's mocking Torah. What's wrong with being brazen to a person who certainly deserves what the Haggadah says, hakei chinov, put his teeth on edge? Why shouldn't I be brazen? The ein roi lishtamesh mimena klal, says the Mishnah Berurah. Don't use this midah whatsoever, afilu ba'avodat Hashem yisbarach, even when it's right. Because then you're going to become a brazen person, even improperly. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, that again we have this personal confrontation. I'm angry because you're mocking me. You're saying, why are you doing that? You're not saying because you want to hear an answer. You want to express the derision that you have for me. You want to say that I'm acting like some type of ignorant person, primitive person, and I want to give it to you. And usually where that's coming from is not from a good place, says the Mishnah Berurah. It's not coming from a place of self-assuredness that I know what I want to do, and I know that I'm doing right, and I know that I'm discordant with cultural norms because I want to be discordant, and I want to be my own person, and I'm proud of what I'm doing. It becomes a sense of lack of self-confidence, lack of self-assuredness. Says the Rambam, which I didn't bring here, that David HaMelech was mocked ma'od. You probably have seen it in Rashi in different places, that the Umos HaOlam make fun of us because of chukim, because of shatnes, because of Parah Aduma, because of other things. David HaMelech was attacked right and left all the time. All the Midrashim teach us that. And the Rambam talks about it at the end of Hilchos Me'ilah. There's a long Rambam there. And it says, even though the David HaMelech says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Taflu alai sheker zedim. All these people who are intending to mock me are putting falsehoods upon me. They're mocking me. Ani b'cholev etzor pikudecha. A pasuk in Kuf Yotes. I'm going to observe your mitzvos with all of my heart. David HaMelech was able to try to avoid the shame that was there, but it's not simple. Therefore, we say La'olam Lo Nevosh, that we shouldn't be embarrassed. The Chovos HaLevavos writes another part for understanding. Chovos HaLevavos Shar HaYichud Perek Gimel. Efshar shiudu lanu ha'umot b'malot ha'chachma v'abina. Don't expect others to agree with you. Ad she'idu lanu harayot v'hamuftim, until the proofs that we want to bring will be able to testify to their truth. V'idei ha'seichel al amitat toratenu. Our seichel has to speak truth. V'omen emunatenu, and the righteousness, the correctness of our beliefs. You're not allowed, says the Chovos HaLevavos, just to talk. When you talk and when you reply, It has to be based on something. It has to be based on knowledge. If it's based on ignorance, don't expect somebody to be impressed with what you're saying if you don't know what you're talking about. Don't expect that someone to be moved by what you're saying or to be inspired by the values that you do truly hold dear, when in fact you don't understand them yourself. And says the other Rabbeinu Bachya in Chumash, I underline some things. There's a Mamin Mitzad HaKabbalah. I believe because such I was Mekabel. I had great Rabbeim, Zichronom Livracha. And I learned from them and I was inspired from them. And that instilled with me the Emunah, and that's true. Emunah Tova hi mi'achar she'HaKabbalah amitit. Aval ein la shleimut. But just to have that Emunah by itself is not complete. It's missing shleimus. Lefi she'ein ba chochma. I saw great people. And I was inspired by them, and if they did things, then I should try to emulate them. But that doesn't mean that I can carry it myself and explain to others, because had I asked them, I would have received replies and understanding. But if I don't seek that for myself, if it's only mitzad HaKabbalah, not mitzad HaChochma, then I'm missing. What's wrong? Because if it's mitzad HaKabbalah, read the end of the second line where it's underlined, Eino batuach ba'atzmo, you're unsure of yourself. Eino batuach ba'atzmo, you're unsure of yourself. You might believe well, but all of a sudden you're challenged, you're not sure of yourself. V'vadai efshar shi'atel libo, and because you're unsure of yourself, your heart might be turned. We talked about personal challenges. Someone challenges you and you give an answer, and by their response, or even before they respond, you see that your answer is empty. It's without tochen, it's without meaning. And therefore, you know that you're speaking things that are empty of meaning. That might cause a personal crisis. Hapikeach in the next paragraph. He's satisfied, he studied, he understands, he knows why he's right. There's less chance that he'll be embarrassed. There's less chance that he's going to make an error. Shelo speak on this bottom line, Inyan emunato mitzad HaKabbalah levad. Kabbalah, having things from our great teachers, from tzaddikim, is not enough. We have to know ourselves. And therefore, on the Mishnah that we started with, the Tosfos Shontif says, Damasha Tosiv. Why do you have to learn much? Shekod b'Torah. Because if you don't learn Torah, you won't know an answer. You'll hear things. You'll quote something that was nice, that was said one time, and it's really sounded good in its context, and you remembered it. But all of a sudden, when you come to the point of confrontation, you see that you don't understand it. It's merely words that you're saying that sounded nice at their time, but they're totally inappropriate now. You have to understand what you're going to say. Says the Malbim on this pasuk that we saw already about the fool. The pasuk in Mishlei says, okay, first the Malbim says on the top, mitzvah shelo lomar davar she'eno nishma. There's a mitzvah to be quiet. If you're going to say something that there's no chance that somebody's going to accept it and to understand it, to appreciate it, you're just talking to talk, there's a mitzvah to keep quiet. Think before you talk. Make a decision before you talk. Don't just stop talk. Sometimes we're in places we hear things. In Israel, most of you don't listen to the radio, but sometimes they interview people about things which are very delicate. And people don't know that siyag la'chochma shtika. If you keep quiet, people will think that you're smart, even though you're not. Siyag la'chochma shtika. And sometimes I hear interviewers who are maligim, mahadrid maligim, who want to make fun, and they talk to people who are nice people but not learned, not able to speak, and therefore they give all sorts of foolish answers, and then they are attacked, and hundreds of thousands of people are listening. And the Torah just goes down and goes down and goes down because this person assumed for himself the right, the prerogative to speak in the fact of Torah. There's some people who know how to speak. Some people know how to give answers all the time. They're thought through. They're thoughtful. They know what to say for the people who are there. But other people don't. And therefore, the Malbim explains the pasuk, Al ta'an ksil kivalto. On the one hand, don't answer the fool in his foolishness. Pen tishvelo gamato. You might be just like him. What's the pasuk referring to, says the Malbim? If you're no smarter than him, and you answer him with foolishness which matches his foolishness, tishvelo gamato, well, you're no different than him. Anekasil kivalto, pen yechacham beinav. But if you're able to answer him so he'll know that he's not chacham beinav, he doesn't know about what he's discussing, then that's a mitzvah, that's the answer that you're supposed to give, because then you're learned, and then what you say has validity. And thus we have a framework for approaching these issues. The framework talks about a number of things. The first part is a certain level of self-assuredness that is based on knowledge. Self-assuredness has two parts to it. One part's mitzad HaKabbalah. I learned Shulchan Aruch, and I learned Rambam, and I learned Midrashim, and I learned Rashi and Chumash, and I learned Rav Dessler. So therefore I know what I'm doing is correct. That's one level. But when it comes to a confrontation, the level isn't yet completed because I don't know enough what to say. And that's the second one, a person has to learn. And if a person hasn't learned, then a person keeps quiet. Pen tishvelo, you'll be the same type of fool as a person that you're trying to combat because you don't know anything more than he does. He speaks foolishness and you speak foolishness. But of course, since you're speaking in the name of Torah and you're speaking foolishness, there's a chilul Hashem involved. And then a person has to know whom to respond and how to respond and to understand these things. So there's a number of issues here, but I want to focus, this is for your information, I want to focus on a couple of other things as well, as we'll get to them because we can't do everything in one day. This is a lot of food for thought, and those who are confronted with those things know that they have to learn and ask others for that learning and that information, that knowledge that they themselves don't have. There's a lot of things that are written that are intelligent that one can learn from. Let's talk about particularly challenging issues that can come up either in individual conversations or can come up in classroom situations. I will distinguish between people who want to learn, who want to understand, and people who don't want to hear a thing whatsoever. As we're all aware, the issue of evolution is a major issue. Great scientists, people who, I would say, I can't speak for everybody here, but they might be smarter than 99% of us put together, believe in things that are evolution. So for me to go to someone whose IQ is beyond mine, and who has all sorts of information that I don't have an inkling. I've read some of the things myself, but I don't understand all the things I read. There's higher level of scientific information that I don't understand. And to say you're wrong, that doesn't answer anyone. It just sounds like I'm a foolish person. Those who go with certain Christian beliefs, what they call creationism now, also doesn't help me whatsoever. I don't want to be in the same court with them. But I do have to know how to understand. And I have to know what the major issues are. Because the major issues are not how an amoeba develops or how something amphibious comes across the ground. That's not the major issue. I'm not saying that they are not issues, but I don't think those things defy our amun and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rambam says in the first of the Shlosh Asar Ikarim, that is, we have a nusach for it in the Siddur. What we have, the Ani Mamins in the Siddur, Rambam did write. Somebody put it together, but they're good. They're accurate. If you want to see the Rambam, what he wrote, it's in his Perush Mishnayos to Perek Chelik in Sanhedrin. So the Rambam writes at length. But says the Rambam, what's the first of the Ani Mamins? Shakadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Borei Umanhig. Listen carefully, please. Don't think that there's something magic that the Rambam wanted to have 13 and therefore he didn't write 14. Rambam says there are 13 because there's 13. That's what the Rambam says. And I have a kasha on the Rambam. If I was the Rambam, I would have, just like he said that you should only daven only to God and God has no goof, and each one of them are separate animamins, each one of them are separate ikarei emunah. If I was the Rambam, I would have written animamin be'emunah shlema shakadosh baruch hu borei et olam. And the number 2, I would have written animamin be'emunah shlema shehu manhig et olam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu leads the world. But thank goodness for all of us, I'm not the Rambam. And the Rambam paskined when he wrote this first animamin that borei umanhig go together in the same chapter. And that becomes the crux of the issue. Our belief is that if whatever happened in history and how anything developed, which I don't know, and there's interesting things that are written about it, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only brought things into creation, he not only created the original matter, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu directs things. And says, the Rambam and others say as well, not everyone agrees with right now what I'm saying, but I think it's true, that if sometimes somebody would point out to us that maybe I could prove that a frog became a bird, whatever those things, I can develop some type of proof for it, that doesn't challenge my belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because if the frog turned into a bird over a certain amount of time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be that way, he directed it that way, he was the manhig, then that doesn't challenge my belief. He's not only a borei, he not only brought things into the world, he's a manhig. And that becomes the crux of the problem. The problem is also not how old the world is. I, personally, have no difficulty in believing that it was 6 years old, it's 57, 75, but there's a perush on Rashi in Yeshaya that is brought by one of the Talmidim of Rav Hirsch that says before creation each day was 1,000 years old. Once each day can be 1,000 years old, can be 1,000,000 years old as well. I'm not saying that we have to accept those beliefs. But if we make those our points of argument and they aren't the critical points, then we ourselves can find ourselves being confused. The question here is not exactly what occurred in history. The question is who is in charge of history. The Rambam says creation and being in charge of history, directing history, is all one and the same subject. He's borei umanig. They are not two separate ikarim that I might have thought would have been appropriate. They're one and the same. And that becomes the issue. If I don't know enough, I can't argue against evolution. I can't say that so-and-so said, even though it certainly may be true, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this on this day and each one was a separate creation. Rav Kook writes about such things as well. Authorship of Tanakh. Okay? How many know who Yeshaya 1 and Yeshaya 2 was? Anybody know? Anybody know Yeshaya 1 and Yeshaya 2? If you pay attention, if you're learning Yeshaya well, you'll see that there is a different type of signon, evidently, when you come to Yeshaya Perek Mem, to the end of the Sefer. Up to Perek Mem in Yeshaya, there's one type of stylistic type of writing, which I'm not an expert about, and the content is a very sad content of Churban, of destruction, of terrible prophecies of what's going to be. You begin with Perek Mem, which is Haftorah we read on Shabbos, Nachamu, 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 Ami, then there is a different type of content that goes on. And the people want to take away the validity of Torah. Talk about Yeshaya 1, Yeshaya 2. If you've never even heard about it before, how do you respond when somebody talks about it? And you read people write about the Rav Breuer, okay, writes about such things. Nechama Leibovitz writes about such things to show us how what people see as being separate aren't separate at all. But that prophecy of doom has a separate type of style, a separate type of language, a separate means of expression. Because doom, if I want to express it, comes across in a different way than hope, than aspirations. Think about when you're playing music between minor keys and major keys. Certain types of music imply doom or in terms of sadness. Others imply ideas of happiness, of hope, of aspiration, of that which can come. But that which might be challenging more and more to people who find themselves in the outside world is number 3, cultural norms. The students here might not appreciate it, but anyone who's 20 years older than you in Kal V'chomer, then Kal V'chomer, those of us who are much more than 20 years older for you, stand in astonishment and looking what's happening in the world around us. Values that were assumed and accepted by all, whether religious people or not religious people, of what's supposed to be, what marriage is supposed to be. Even in 2003 in the United States, with President Clinton, they passed an act dealing with the, I don't think it was called the sanctity of marriage, but the Goodness of Marriage Act, having to do with men marry women, etc., etc. Just in 10 years, the world has changed. Cultural norms is an extraordinary thing. Of course, those who have a bigger picture of history know that when cultural norms change, there's often pendulum. Pendulum goes back and forth, and who knows, by the time you get to be older, who knows what the world is going to say about what is going on and what is accepted now. But you find yourself at a point in which you're challenged. Even though Michla is not particularly feminist, as you've figured out by now, I'll tell you, those of you especially who'll be in secular colleges, you'll all be rabbis next year. Okay? You know what your smicha is going to be next year? Your skirt, right? They're going to see you wear a skirt. They see you're an Orthodox Jew. They expect you to know everything. They're going to expect you to know. And how do you answer? How do you talk about values? And how do you express values that are long-term? Will they be accepting to say these are God-given values when other religions, lahavdil, but other religions who also say that they are God-given things that change the rules in the middle? When people who say that they are orthodox in their own beliefs but publicly decide that they and declare that they lead their own lifestyles based on cultural norms the way that they wish to do so? How's one talked about values? What's the first part? To understand the values for ourselves. If it's not clear to us that marriages should be between men and women, I'm now not talking about individuals who have their own particular challenges and their own particular problems. That's not our discussion now. Not our discussion. Not our discussion. There's people who can be challenged, and I don't have to decide that their challenge is meaningless. It might be a great challenge, but that's a personal thing. Once it becomes public, once it comes in the open, once the closet door unfortunately is opened, then that becomes a challenge for all, and somehow it drags everybody around. Personal freedom seems to trump all. Of course it's not true. Of course it's not true. There are, even in terms of one's community, there's loyalty to community. Even in terms of one's country, there's loyalty to country. And everyone can do what they want to do. But of course people talk about victimless crimes. We have to understand within ourselves that even though two people might agree to be part of a particular type of behavior, it affects everyone around them. If there are people in this room who now, or in past times, were challenged to say, well, if that's what they want and that keeps them happy, why can't they do it? Then it's not a victimless crime, because we ourselves become victims. We ourselves become carried along with these cultural norms, and we sometimes forget how discordant they are. We have to understand ourselves. Will everyone understand it? Not necessarily so. Does somebody want to understand it? Is there a kasil who wants to understand it? Someone wants to say, why are you against it? Why are you against personal happiness? Do you know what to say? Do you know what to say today, that sometimes a person has to put their own needs aside for the greater needs? Maybe you can give them a proof from the halacha. The halacha tells us that if someone has a loss during Yom Tov, they don't observe mourning during Yom Tov. Also, simcha de rabim, when the simcha of the rabim comes, doche avelus diyochid. It pushes away the individual avelus. You're not an avel anymore in that particular time. The greater good for Am Yisrael becomes so. I usually don't speak personally, but I'll speak this time. I had my loss in Simchas Torah this year. And then afterwards, things were taken care of them in a Simchas Torah. I went to the Rabbonim and say what I'm supposed to do. It's Yontiv. Ein aninas b'Yontiv. To go home and you have to make Yiddish. I couldn't go to my regular shul in the morning to do hakafos. So I went to the early one that did each hakafo was a minute. Asi, Simcha de Rabim. The greater needs of the Rabbim comes and push away the individual. Because there's a greater good. There's this Am Yisrael that we talked about earlier today. You have to know about Israel. You have to read about Israel. Sadly enough, there aren't enough good people in Israel who talk about why Israel is right. Or how to see things even when Israel isn't always right. Israel isn't always right. Makes mistakes. Sometimes people do things that are wrong. Sometimes soldiers misbehave. There's no question about it. Sometimes people who are in leadership positions do something wrong, and that's something to be regretted. One doesn't have to be an apologist for everything that's done, but one has to see the total picture. One has to be aware of the fact if in the last 3 years, 250,000 people have been killed in Syria, I don't know how many have been killed in Yemen in the last couple of weeks. I don't know about the numbers that are there. And in Iraq. And even when something goes wrong, 100 people are killed in Gaza, and that takes the headlines, that remains in the headlines. We have to understand that there's this bias which is there, which is the anti-Semitism which is going. We have to be knowledgeable. People will expect you to be defenders of Medinat Yisrael, and you have to know that's what it'll be. People will talk about it. I don't spend time on college campuses, but I talk with people who are on college campuses. I'm able to hear from people what is there. There's demonstrations, there's BDS, to boycott, divest, give sanctions against Israel. There's big stuff. There's demonstrations. They're sometimes very, very frightening. Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give those of you who live in America a continued shmirah. And America is still a good place. You know what happened in France this past Friday? France this past Friday, I don't know all the details, I just know what I read. Somebody was walking, two people walking the street, and a group of 40 people, and I don't know what brand of goyim they were, Stam goyim or Muslim goyim, I don't know. Did you see what they say what they were? I don't know what they were. They were attacked. It's scary. Very frightening. They're not happy people. 40 people Friday. They were attacked this Friday. Yeah. In the streets of Paris. In the streets of Paris. And I'm not talking about the murders that occurred in the summer that occurred. But there's enough people here from France. They know enough Ivrit or enough English. Maybe some of you know French. Talk to the girls here from France. Talk what life is there, how their parents feel, how they walk in the street. Somebody I know was at a conference in France during the past summer. Okay? He was told, certainly don't wear a kippah on the street. He was told, wear some type of hat that doesn't look like it. And if he was staying far away from shul, he was told maybe he shouldn't go to shul. He doesn't know exactly where he's going. He might have difficulties with it. Great challenges. You have to speak from knowledge. And again, it's not a knowledge of defensiveness, that everything that here is right. It's not right. Just like any place, it's not right. There's people, and some are better. Nebuch, sometimes some people are even worse. And sometimes we have to be ashamed of what individuals do. But when one sees the entire world, one can say, where were you for the 250,000 people who've been killed in Syria in the past 3 years? People are victims. They're suffering terribly. And all you're focusing is on the 100 people who might have been unjustly killed in Gaza? Sometimes the growth makes us learn more. And the challenges makes us grow and to learn and to understand. And there's two ways of dealing with the confrontations. Three ways, really. One is to be silent, which is very problematic, because yechacham beinov. But maybe nobody will listen to you, and you don't have the right amount of information, so anything you're going to say will be worse. You all know the phrase kol hamosif goreya. Sometimes when you add, you detract. And one is to withdraw. And sometimes you're called upon to withdraw even though it's uncomfortable. You have this Macaulay group, or your interview in Temple University, which is quite serious because they want to see that you're one of the guys or one of the girls, and you hang around nicely, and therefore you'll be part of this small group of graduate students who have to work together. And you don't show up. Or you show up and you stand to the side, and you're brave, and you don't even hold a glass of Coca-Cola that somebody might think it's a real alcoholic drink. You decide not to hold a glass whatsoever, just to make sure you say that you're different, and you're dressed differently anyway. How do you feel about yourself at that moment? When somebody looks at you and say, what are you doing? Do you turn red? Why would you turn red? Why does somebody turn red? You're embarrassed. Why are we embarrassed? Why are we embarrassed? No, tell me. Why are we embarrassed? I've been embarrassed. Why are you embarrassed? When you're caught doing something wrong, you get embarrassed, right? They catch you. Were you doing something wrong? Absolutely not. So why are you embarrassed? Because we're not always sure of ourselves. And therefore we have to know ourselves. Don't put yourselves in embarrassing positions. That's a word for the wise for all sorts of things. But even when you're involved in Torah mitzvahs, the Shulchan Aruch says, Lo yitbayesh, don't be embarrassed. But I weak, Ribono Shel Olam, I daven mincha v'lo nevosh. I'm still embarrassed. Try to avoid it. Because what do people see when they ask you what you're doing and why you're doing it and what's it for, and you start to stammer and turn red? What do they think? All can figure the answer out, right? There's weakness in what you're doing. You're just following things because you don't know any better. You're unsure of yourself, you don't really believe. And what do the people who are not nice do when you stammer and you stutter and you turn red? What do they do in such situations? What do? They keep on going, making it worse and worse and worse and worse. And what do? Get redder and you get redder. You stammer. And therefore there's places that you don't need to be. People are together and they're talking inappropriately, nivel peh, things that have to do with intimate things, and that's how they're talking about things. Nothing related to study or academics. You're not in a psychology class learning about how different people work in various situations. Therefore, you have to talk about intimate things. And that's a mitzvah if you're going to be a psychologist, to learn about such things. But it's a place where, how do I say, dirty jokes. You have two ways of doing it. You can be there and feel lousy after you walk away because you shouldn't have been there. You can say, excuse me, please don't talk like that. Or you can walk away. I can't promise you about every situation, but I can tell you many, many, many situations where the people are nice people. They're not bad people. They're not out to get anybody. They're not out to do harm, but that's how they live. Every other word is a four-letter word. Every other statement is, okay, you can hear half this stuff on the radio when you listen, in Chutz La'aretz at least. And a person says, please don't talk that way. A few times they'll say, oh, she's here, don't talk that way. If they're nice people, they stop talking that way. Many, many, many times. Do not underestimate a calm statement having to be a very powerful statement. Don't talk like that, and don't turn red. Say it with confidence because you know it's wrong. And it works in many, many situations. And after the initial jokes, and to see if you really mean it, many, many nice people will stop talking that way. I've heard it from so many people. People respect people, nice people. Respect people who have beliefs. If someone, and I'm not talking about the halachos of shaking hands now, it's a separate conversation. But someone chooses correctly, though, not to answer, not to receive a hand that is offered to shake a hand, and one doesn't blush in terms, says, I don't. Look carefully. Or one holds papers in one's hands. Then people learn to respect it. Many people are nice people. They're not all bad people. And you know what happens when you face a challenge and you're successful with it? Of course, I can't promise you that you'll always be successful. You know what happens when you do? The next times it'll be less of a challenge because you see you can do it, because you have a base, because you have a solid underlying belief and behavior that's shored up with knowledge and with understanding. Don't give up. Don't turn away. You're in the middle of a class. That's not the time, I would imagine, in most cases, to say, please, sir, don't use those words in front of me. You can decide, and I can't give advice for this. Can I tune this stuff out or not? Sometimes it's hard to tune things out, not just because I hear, because certain things that are said, not just the four-letter words, but certain discussions reverberate against the neshama. I have to make a decision for myself. What am I going to do? I don't think it's an easy thing to tell somebody to get up and walk out or not to come when they know that what the discussion is going to be. I don't say it's easy whatsoever. But I have to know for myself that I'm the balabos. I'm the person who's in charge of myself. And that becomes the end of what we're going to talk about today. Because all in all, the challenges and the confrontations and the opportunities that exist don't exist in a vacuum. They're not on a piece of paper. They're not even in a shir that's in the auditorium, the Beit Knesset of the Michlala. They exist in real life, and one can't know what's going to happen, but they exist with me coming in contact with others. And ultimately, the me is what's going to count the most. I have to know myself. I have to be aware of myself. I have to know my strengths, and I have to know my weaknesses. The more that one is in an environment that is a protective environment, but one doesn't use that protection to escape from what eventually is going to be those challenges, those confrontations. But one uses that environment to protect oneself, to be protected when they go out in the world. And not just wait for things to happen because they're going to happen. To take that safety and to use that safety to make oneself a better person. More solid in one's knowledge. More solid in one's belief. More aware of those things which are challenging to me as an individual. Whether in terms of my belief, whether in terms of my commitment, whether in terms of my observance. The more that I'm this person who has this shlemus to myself, not just religiously, but my personality and psychologically, the more that we are able to meet the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made man first by himself, and then he made man part of a society. So if you're learning some of the things from the Rav Zatzal, so you've learned about what the Rav calls Adam 1 and Adam 2. We have to be this individual of courage, which is represented by Avram Avinu, Kol ha'olam be'ever echad v'hu be'ever hasheni. And we have to be this person who lives within the world himself and knows that he has to be this chacham because that's what people expect from him. Sometimes he demonstrates the chachma through silence and sometimes through the knowledge. He'll always demonstrate that knowledge through the decisions that he or she are going to make. Do I talk? What will I say? And how much does it reflect truly what is inside me? The more that what inside me is emes, the more that emes is going to come out, and the more that I'm going to have success. HaKadosh Baruch Hu builds us for that type of success if we wish to take advantage of it. We shall have hatzlacha.